wanted to make this video because it seems that people have largely misunderstood this movie. There seems to be, two categories. On the one hand, you have people who just completely fail to understand what's happening, and because of it, they think it's dumb. They just look at all the fourth wall breaking video game content and all this, and they're just like, oh yeah, it's just some chicks and action, whatever. And they just completely skipped over the actual point of the movie. And then on the other hand, you have people who thought that this movie is about empowering women, which is not what this is about at all, not even remotely. It seems that even people who generally enjoyed the movie, they didn't fully grasp what it was about. So I guess this is just an explanation video for all those people. So, simple enough, this is a movie about dissociation. Now, for those of you who don't know what this is, who have only vaguely heard of it, dissociation is a psychological process, or as I personally like to call it, a false solution, that consists of detaching your conscious mind from reality. Essentially, it's a coping mechanism, and it alters your perception of your surrounding and the people that are in it. Generally, collectively as people, as the human race, we all agree on one perceived version of reality. But when dissociation occurs, you just gradually detach yourself from that perception, from that reality, to gradually retreat into a world of your own creation. So it's all essentially in your mind. But the point of it is that it can be taken to such an extreme that it essentially appears the way it appears in this movie, in Sucker Punch, which is why this movie is really good. On a really small scale, you have things like daydreaming, where, say, you're in public transport, you have music on, and you're just thinking about something, you're just imagining a whole bunch of stuff. And it's like, you can see the landscape, through your window, but you're not really seeing it, it's passing you by, and it's like your subconscious is obviously registering it, but you're somewhere else. This is on a very small scale. Obviously, that's not exactly dissociation, but that's the concept that it rests on. But to an extreme degree, it appears the same way that this movie portrays it. Now, naturally, it's an entirely subconscious process. When it happens, you're not aware it's happening. And you can imagine that needing to detach yourself from reality, for your mind to trigger, a process that detaches you from reality, you need something significant to actually trigger that process, which is why this usually happens in case of trauma. So how does it all relate to Sucker Punch? Well, the setting is actually really just on point and very appropriate for this. So we have this protagonist who just recently lost her mother and who later on accidentally kills her sister and is left to fend for herself with her stepfather, who clearly has less than good intentions towards her. I think it's important to note that the loss of the mother is not just the loss of a protective parental figure, it's also the loss of a protective figure that was shielding the protagonist against the stepfather. So it's like you have this nefarious presence, that is the stepfather. And the mother, I guess, was just literally like a wall, because I'm sure that while she was still alive, he didn't actually make any move to seize her money or anything like this. He waited until her death. And I'm sure that partially the children, they were protected because it wasn't beneficial for him to make any move yet, and also because the mother was acting as a protective presence towards her children. So the moment this is gone, she's just left with this negative presence in her life. So not only does she lose her mother, she's left at the mercy of the stepfather, but then while trying to protect her sister from that same guy, she ends up killing her on complete accident. So some of you may be wondering why she's able to dissociate as spectacularly as the movie portrays. At her age, she is 20 years old, and of course it's not like she's age 60 or something like this and her brain is completely unmovable, because the older you get, of course, the less flexible you are. And that is why childhood is usually the perfect stage for this. And when I say childhood, I do mean before the age of 10. Because to me, already at age 20, she's no longer an adolescent, she's not a child anymore. Of course, there's actually no age to be impacted by something traumatic in your life. But triggering a response such as dissociation, it's pretty drastic, honestly. It's something that's easier done in childhood, precisely because the mind is so unfixed at this moment. If you've already lived your life and you've already learned of a specific way to cope, then you're used to processing things a specific way. So for your brain to just trigger something else completely in such a drastic way, it's pretty exceptional. It doesn't usually happen all that easily past a certain age. The reason why it's so easy for this to happen in childhood is that I guess the mind of a child, your mind when you are a child, is a bit like a sponge. I know that other people who have compared it to a sponge, and they're absolutely right. you're just ready to absorb all the tools you will need to function later on in life, in theory. At this age, your mind has the capacity to head towards any road. Like I said, it's still largely unfixed. So when there is something as heavy as a traumatic event that comes to disturb the mind and just disturbs its inner peace, it's incredibly easy for it to just set up an emergency procedure and it's like, okay, what the fuck do? I can't do this, I can't deal with this. And it's going to regurgitate one of its own coping mechanisms. In early childhood, your mind has not been taught by a guiding authority figure how to properly interact with the world. Of course, you're always born with an inner knowledge on how to do this, but you absolutely have to be steered in the right direction. And those things include knowing how to cope and process things that are happening to you. So to go back to Sucker Punch, one of the reasons I'm guessing she's able to do it, why she's able to dissociate, is that to me it looks like this character has got very little agency and independence of her own. It looks like she hasn't reached the age of majority just yet because she doesn't have any situation of her own. She doesn't have any money, she doesn't have a job, she doesn't have a position. She really doesn't have a situation. She's not about to go study. She's not even, even if you want to go real sexist about it, no one is trying to marry her off to anyone. She's not about to get a situation of her own. She does not have any independence. She was largely dependent on her mother, on her family environment, and I'm guessing a little bit her sister. And the moment it's gone, she has absolutely nothing to attach herself to. She has nothing to latch onto. Normally the process of detaching yourself from this environment is very gradual, but in her case it looks like it hasn't happened at all. It looks like it's very brutal, it looks like it's very brusque, it looks like she just, it's like the umbilical cord has been cut in just in 1 second, the moment her mother died, that's it. And it's a bit odd that at age 20 she's still in this state. Because of it, she was incredibly sheltered, I think, and she really just has no legal means of her own. She has no way to defend herself against the stepfather. Overall, it looks like she was still completely protected from life by her mother, who just now died. And all of this is a very specific emotional state, level of maturity that I think might have allowed dissociation to occur at her age. It looks like she wasn't fully, set in life. And because of how fragile that state is, the second you bring in a negative element, an impactful enough negative element, then I guess it's enough to actually disturb her inner peace and disturb her inner world enough for her to reach down so deep. The second possible reason is how possibly traumatic the whole situation was. Past a certain age, you should be able to deal with things more or less well, and even if something completely fucks you up, there's a difference between being so traumatized that you no longer can process things and no longer function on your own, versus being severely crippled but still being able to go on more or less. So if this was traumatizing to the point for her that she absolutely could no longer go on by herself, then it would also make sense, it would also stand to reason that she would reach so deep. Now this is for the initial setting. The second most important part is this moment where she's in the asylum, and there's this absolutely incredibly artistic shot of, you have the stepfather right behind her, and you have this one shot on her eye, and then you have the ward on the other side. They're both discussing and cutting a deal to have her lobotomized in a few days. From this moment on, I think in this scene it's important to explain that she has given up. And this is an important fact you need to remember to understand the plot and the way the movie is going. She knows by now that she is going to get a lobotomy. I think it's this moment where she feels completely unheld in a way. There is no one left to protect her, and the one person left that has a semblance of authority over her is right there, selling her off, essentially, so that she wouldn't be able to actually give her own version to the police. And he's basically setting her up, he is trapping her, and he's essentially ruining her life. And I think at this moment she no longer really has any will to fight. She's not really interested in seeking actual justice. She's not actually interested in defending herself. She's not trying to defend herself. She's not trying to right those wrongs. I think she's essentially given up. Now, where are the actual proofs inside the movie that this is about dissociation? Well, the biggest proof is in fact Dr. Gorski's speech. This is the opening of the movie in a sense. Now, hopefully I've explained what dissociation is well enough for everyone here to understand. So, when she states,
Let the pain go. Let the hurt go. Let the guilt go. What you're imagining right now, that world you control, that place can be as real as any pain.
Well, this world that she controls is the one that she is escaping into. This is the one that she's creating inside her mind to escape from this reality. As you remember, reality is the place where all of her relatives are dead and the only person she has left is selling her off to some guy so that she would get lobotomized. Clearly that's not really something that she wants to return to, that she wants to be in. And essentially she's being told that she can let go of everything, she can just, let the hurt and the guilt, all of this, she can let all of it go and just completely detach herself from reality. This speech is really giving her the cue, it's giving her all the tools she needs in order for her to detach herself from reality. The second thing is, every single dissociative episode is cued in, is triggered by a song related to dissociation as well. So in here what you have is Where Is My Mind by Depicts. So this is not really a lyrics analysis video, but I'm going to explain some of the lyrics in every single songs to explain to you exactly how do they relate to the subject of the movie so that you can understand what's happening. So the first verse is with your feet on the air and your head on the ground. So this reversed thing, and try this trick, spin it, your head will collapse. Where is my mind? All of this relates to the sensations you get when you are going through dissociation. One of the things that this song doesn't mention is that you may lose your sense of self, you may lose track of time, etc., etc. But this whole reverse thing, especially your head on the ground, your feet in the air, this is one of the sensations that you have while going through this process. And every single episode is cued in by a song that is similar to this. So right here, this is where she begins her journey. And it's cued in by the song Where Is My Mind? And also by the speech that Dr. Golsky has given. So from now on we have three layers to consider. We have the asylum, which is essentially reality, then the brothel reality, that's how I'm going to call it, and the video game reality. Let's call it that because it's a complete fourfold breaker, so let's just call it that. So to explain what's happening now in this movie, I like to use a Lady Gaga quote. There's this line from the prelude of the music video of Mary the Night, and it goes like, "It's not that I don't want to remember things exactly as they happened, it's just that I prefer to remember them in an artistic way." Which is pretty much what's happening. Don't take the quote at face value, because it's not about remembering things. The point of that quote is that when your brain interprets what it sees, the vision that you receive from this is essentially colored by this world that you've created to make reality bearable. So think of it this way. Think of your eyes and the fact that you can see things. Then imagine you're putting on a pair of sunglasses and your vision is altered. Then you're putting on another pair of sunglasses and your vision is even more altered. And that's pretty much what is happening. And this is why this movie is a really flagrant example of dissociation in my opinion, because it just illustrates and pictures things the way it must happen inside the mind of a victim. And it's really well done, it's really on point. So it's important to note that the brothel is not real, and those video game stuff, they're not real either, okay? None of this is real. She didn't leave the asylum, she's not... She didn't escape or anything. She didn't got, suddenly transported in some sort of alternate reality. She is still in the asylum. What's happening is that she has chosen to interpret what she's seeing and what is happening differently. She's chosen to perceive her reality as this brothel reality. So this is why I'm speaking of it in terms of layers. Now you may recall just a second ago I've stated that the point of an imaginary world is to make reality more bearable. So you may be wondering why exactly did she choose to translate the asylum into a brothel, and what exactly is the reason behind it. And I will say that I think the brothel reality is in fact a lot more revealing than one might think. It's stated later on at the end of the movie that all the wards they were abusing the patients, they were actually hurting them. In that sense, the brothel reality is actually extremely revealing because it actually implies a lot more than reality does imply, and it's bringing certain facts to life, it's bringing certain facts to the forefront. If those people were actually abusing them and hurting them, good luck, actually recovering from anything in those conditions. But considering it was the case, it actually makes sense not only that she's decided to interpret everything that was happening as a brothel. I guess you can say that she's chosen to actually bring one of the major hidden facts of reality. She decided to bring it to the forefront of the stage. Another interesting thing to note about the brothel reality is you'll notice the shift in hierarchy. Before this in the asylum, it was obviously Dr. Gurski running the whole place. She seems to be pretty high in the hierarchy of the staff, and this blue guy, he was just an orderly. But in this version, he's actually the one running the place, he's the one running the show. And the reason for that is because in the asylum, he essentially goes behind everyone's back, including Dr. Gurski. The other orderly, they seem to actually listen to him and follow his orders, so you always have two guys flanking him at all times. He's always walking around with those henchmen. They just obey him, they really follow his orders, they do what he wants them to do. Which is why in here, the hierarchy is completely shifted and is completely different. So now, a little bit of translation.
Jesus! You'll get what you deserve when the high roller comes! Calm down. I will not calm down.
What he really just means is, you'll get what you deserve when you'll get lobotomized. And when later on you hear this...
Don't get too attached to her, okay? We're saving her for the high roller.
To me, what it implies in here is that the patient here that's speaking, she's aware of what's happening. She's also a victim. She's been victimized by these people. She knows that it's not the first time he's done this. He's regularly paid people to actually get some patients lobotomized. And so she's warning the other girls and she's telling them, Blue is actually going to have her lobotomized. The point that's important to know here is that in this tiny moment where her brain is about to interpret what is happening, her mind kind of rewrites this, it just overwrites all of this and decides to translate it into, lobotomy suddenly becomes the high roller. And last, concerning the names of the characters, again, that's not their real names. This is really just how the protagonist has chosen to interpret all of this. She's just chosen to register their names differently and perceive them differently, and thus she hears them differently. And what you're seeing here is the version that is playing inside her mind. The second reason that justifies the brothel reality, aside from how revealing it is that, in general, completely outside of this context, sex can technically be desirable. Depending on the person, you can actually want to have sex. Whereas lobotomy, you technically don't want to have a lobotomy. And it's this element of desire, it's the possibility to want it, that is crucial to understanding the ending of the movie. And last, the protagonist uses all these layers of reality. She's using dissociation in order to fool herself, which is where I think all the misconceptions about the movie being about empowering women comes from. So as I've mentioned, the asylum is really the place where she has given up, where she knows for certain that she will be lobotomized in a few days, where she has no one to reach to, no one that can possibly help her, because by the time the police will actually come to ask her side of the story, she will already have been lobotomized. So she knows that she has absolutely no chance of escaping. She knows that this is where all her possibilities have died. And most importantly, and this is where it relates to the usage of all these layers of reality, of dissociation, the moment she sets foot in the asylum, it's one of these moments where she no longer has any control over her life anymore. She has technically been sold. She's going to be lobotomized against her will. And so, again, to link back to this line in Dr. Gurski's speech, the point of this line is that it speaks of how even if in reality, in the asylum, in her real life, she has no agency of her own. You'll also remember that I mentioned just before this that she had already, even before all these events, she had no independence of her own, no situation of her own. So even in spite of all this, inside her mind, this world that she created, this one she has complete control over precisely because she created it and it's all inside her mind. So all of this is about having a semblance, like I said, it's really about fooling herself. It's about having a semblance of control. It's about fooling yourself into thinking that you are in control, that you are in power, when you are in fact not. So this is really why I'm saying that this movie is not about empowering women, because if anything, this whole story is extremely tragic. She has been thrown into a situation that is completely unfair and undeserved, and now she has to trick herself and fool herself into thinking that things are not so bad. All of this in order to actually bear with it, all of this in order to actually stand it. I think it would have been either this or just directly killing herself. When you have to actually reach so far inside your mind to fool yourself into thinking that everything is okay when nothing is in fact okay, that is not empowering. This is a desperate measure and it's not about empowerment. Now, still concerning the dissociation in all these layers of reality, you may tell me that of course it's happening inside her head, but why should that mean that it is not real? You know, you may give me something a little bit like this quote in Harry Potter in the last book. And that's a fair point. And the reason why it's not truthful and legitimate empowerment and why it's not legitimate and real, the reason for this lies in the difference between action and imaginary. Imagination, and thus as an extent fiction, is a very good tool to give you a sample, a short dose of an experience while maintaining a level of distance. But when there is an action that is taken outside of your mind, in the outside world, it actually creates connections inside your brain that allows you to truthfully experience something. That allows you to truly live through an event, that allows you to truly live through a certain experience. The difference is really between those connections. When you are imagining something, you have not truly lived it, you have only imagined it. And while imagination has always been a powerful tool because it works on intuition and inner knowledge and creativity, it is never really the same as actually experiencing something for yourself outside of your mind. So as long as all these pleasant experiences, as long as all these adventures that she's going through never breach the barrier of her mind, for her to live them in the outside world, in the real world, she will never truly have actually grown and experienced these things that could have changed her, and in this case, namely, empower her, which is why she's not actually truthfully empowered in any way. Concerning the third layer of reality, the video game reality, I think that it can also be explained with what I've mentioned just earlier about the fact that the elderly were essentially abusing the patients. That would explain to me why she would need to escape into yet another layer of reality, why she would need to escape even deeper inside her mind, and why she would need to dissociate even harder. There are a few things that I'd like to note about this video game reality, and I'm mentioning all this because if the movie had been introduced with the video game reality, taking a look at all these details could actually help you understand that A, this is not real, and it could help you understand what is actually happening in reality in this very moment. So first of all, you have things like
The bomb, codename kitchen knife, is
you already knowing what is happening in the brothel/asylum, you understand that they're just speaking about a fucking knife. But the way she's choosing to interpret it in this reality, in the video game reality, is that it's all being transformed into this nice adventure, and it's like she goes on this quest where she has to, overcome a bunch of enemies, etc., etc. And I guess it kind of makes it a bit more fun inside her mind, which is essentially, incidentally, one of the reasons why I think most people play video games. We all just want to go on nice adventures without actually leaving our couch and just, overcome enemies and reach a goal, etc., etc. And I think this is why she decided, well, on the director's part, he just liked the aesthetic. But, within the narrative, I'm guessing that the reason why she did this is because it's just a bit more fun that way, it's a lot more interactive, etc. And likewise, for the lighter, you have two crystals that are inside the throat of a dragon, and when struck together produce the most magnificent fire you've ever seen. When there is this scene afterward where one of the characters die, immersion is essentially broken. She has to return to reality because something just disturbed her at this moment. So she comes back to the brothel reality to look at what's happening. And at some point it's really interesting. She has immediately to return to the mission to finish it properly because she just cannot stand to see this thing, so she has to go through with it via the video game reality. It was very interesting. This one scene can really give you a look, can really give you some insight on how all these realities are actually taking place. On how all these realities are actually superposed, I guess.
The idea is simple. Take care of the gunman, deactivate the bomb, and steal it. The code numbers for the bomb and the jet packs for your escape are in that duffel.
Got it.
Sweet pea, I'm glad you changed your mind. Well, there you have it.
I think this scene is pretty nice because it's visible in the way that this character, she sits in her, whatever this thing is, I don't know how to call it. She sits into it and everything is ready for her and everything here is ready to welcome her and accommodate her. She sits in there and first of all, this is her machine, she's the one who's piloting it. She has this lollipop, she can chill with it, and she has this helmet with her name written on it. And I think it's really interesting because I can see why it's preferable for them to actually be in this reality rather than, you know, in the brothel or the asylum where regardless terrible things are happening to them. I can see why all of them would prefer to be in this reality. Regardless of how they choose to interpret the asylum reality, well, they're suffering inside it anyway. So I can see why it would be better and more interesting for them to remain in the video game reality because the second they're inside it, they can imagine all these really nice things and everything is just welcoming and tailored to them and it's accommodating them. And I can see how it's just more pleasant for them than actually suffering in the asylum and / brothel. Please note the recurrent usage of the term paradise and freedom, and please also understand, it's very important, that the usage of these words are not actually referencing to the commonly understood, meaning of paradise and freedom. And it's actually referencing to something else, and we're going to see later on to what exactly. But it's important that whenever you hear this, especially in the scenes with the guardian angel, that you understand that she's not actually referencing to actual freedom. It's not freedom in the sense that she's escaping the asylum, it's referencing to something else. And lastly, about the timing, it slightly looks like in the video game reality time is... everything takes a lot longer, everything is stretched over a longer span of time. Essentially, think of this moment where you're just laying down in bed or wherever, and you're just thinking inside your mind, you check the clock, it's a specific hour, and you just go ahead and daydream away, and then you just look again on the clock, and it may feel to you inside your mind like several hours have passed, but then it's maybe, half an hour? This is essentially the same. So it's not a question of how fast time was passing, it's a question of how you were perceiving it. So the deeper she's into her subconscious, the slower it seems that time is passing.
Don't close your eyes. I need you to look at me. The freedom to love.
And now, finally, the last part. Once again, the entire scene is told through the prism of this colored version of reality. It's told through the prism of the brothel reality. So all the details, you have the attendants preparing her to have sex with a high roller. You have the bedroom, pretty fancy. All of this in reality is just her being prepared for lobotomy. So she's probably being attended by nurses. That guy, the high roller, is the doctor, ultimately. So this scene is why I warned that this concept of freedom and paradise mentioned all throughout the movie, and especially mentioned by this guardian angel, was just completely deceptive. So it was never about an actual escape from the asylum, like I said. It was never about the protagonist seeking any justice for her stepfather, unlawfully, shoving her in an asylum. It was just all about 100% giving up on everything, which is also what I mentioned at the beginning. During this moment when she knows that she's being sold, she had already given up, and this is why it was important to note it. She wasn't thinking of actually escaping, she had already just completely given up. So in this movie, what freedom and paradise represent is this blissful state of total severance from reality. As you can see, after the lobotomy, she's completely gone. She's entirely unaware of what's happening in her surrounding. That guy is trying to shake her and he's like, "You're completely gone, you're in paradise." Yes, indeed she is. But paradise is essentially inside her mind. Generally, you don't necessarily have to be completely catatonic to retreat into a world of your own, but here that's what's happening. There's this quote that the doctor charged with lobotomy says, "It's like she wanted me to do it." She basically transformed this experience into something that she could embrace, precisely because that way she wouldn't have to actually suffer over it. If she convinces herself inside her mind that this is something that she enjoys and that she wants, It partially nullifies the pain that she would have felt over it. It partially nullifies the suffering, all the despair she would have felt over being sold, etc., etc. It nullifies all of this. And again, really, this is why I've explained the fact that this journey towards freedom, and the term freedom in itself as well as paradise, are not what you think it is. It was completely deceptive the entire time. This whole journey, this whole movie, the whole point of it was about completely detaching herself from reality so that she would avoid actually suffering over it. It's just like this speech said, essentially, let the hurt go, let the guilt go. She doesn't have to feel in despair, she doesn't have to feel any guilt over her sister dying, she doesn't have to be depressed over her mother being dead. She doesn't have to suffer with the fact that she's essentially been sold. She can just completely let it all go, which is precisely what she did. And she can also choose to look at it in a different light to make it more bearable. Now, the only real quote, because he keeps telling her, freedom from pain, freedom from this, freedom from that, all this is pretty much happening in her head. The one line that is true is,
don't close your eyes. I need you to look at me.
This is the one part that's real, because he does her this because her eyes actually physically need to be open for the procedure to happen. But this is the one actual line that she actually took from reality and just transformed in this way. I can bet you that if we hadn't seen it through the prism of the brothel reality, through the prism of her having sex with this guy, he would have told her this exact same line for completely different reasons. So I guess the way you can look at it is that the build-up towards them having sex is actually the build-up towards her getting lobotomized. And finally, one of the reasons why he states, it's like she wanted me to do it, I think she also, aside from the fact that, in her head sex can be desirable versus a lobotomy cannot, I think the reason it was like she wanted him to do it was because by embracing it fully, then she could also fully embrace this dissociative state. He was telling her before this that this event happening was freedom from pretty much everything. And so, as I've already explained, the term freedom in itself actually refers to the state of complete severance from reality. So I think that by embracing it completely, she was capable of embracing the state and going into the state completely, which is pretty much one of the reasons why she's so catatonic afterward. One of the sad things about this movie is that when actual freedom presented itself, she was already too far gone. She was already gone. Because right after this, Dr. Gurski actually understands that Blue was falsifying her signature and had been doing it for quite some time. And because of it, he gets arrested. And that's really great, but it's already too late because she's already gone. Oh, and one last thing.
I don't have a ticket.
I know. It's okay. Go find a seat in the back. Try and get some sleep. We got a long way to go.
Thank you.
Concerning whether or not she truly did escape, it's completely debatable, I guess. I do think she's escaped, and the reason for this is that it's actually mentioned in the movie.
Just 1 week here. She stabbed an orderly, started a fire, and helped another patient to escape.
But the way the ending is done, it's a little bit like Inception, it's just deliberately ambiguous. So there are a number of signs in the movie that just make an appearance at the end when the character is trying to escape. So there's first of all this boy that we see in the queue in the bus, and he showed up previously only in one of their dissociative episodes. Then the biggest sign, the guardian angel himself being the bus driver. What the hell is he doing here? He was never here in reality before. This guy, both of these characters only ever existed inside their mind. And now here he is suddenly in reality. And finally, the last sign is this billboard when they're in the bus that just has the word paradise on it, and it just...
What is it? You're not here? Huh? You're not here anymore? You're in paradise?
So, presumably, and I think that's pretty much what happened, she did in fact escape. But the thing is that she's so far into her own dissociative state that she just perceives absolutely everything through the prism of the world that she's created. So the bus driver is replaced by someone that existed inside her mind, an image that she had created inside her mind, and he's being nice to her. I'm not sure that's exactly what happened in real life, but the point is that he's being nice to her in here. So she probably did escape, but this is what happened. Or the second possible theory is that she didn't escape, and she was actually caught before she could go very far, And she just dreamed up instead the entire escape because she couldn't bear the fact that she was returning to the asylum and that, you know, her sister was dead, etc., etc. But I really do think that she in fact escaped. I think she's just so far in this state that she sees everything through it and she just cannot detach herself from it anymore. This whole thing kind of reminds me a little bit of Narnia. And the reason for this is that, well, Lucy is the first one who discovers Narnia, but then all the children afterward, all her siblings are in on this game. And I was kind of wondering, in this movie, at first it's obviously the protagonist that actually starts this whole dissociation things. But then afterward, when she's in the video game reality, all those girls, all her friends, they're here with her. So the question here is, are they taking part in this transformation of reality kind of thing that's happening? Or is it just strictly the protagonist imagining all of this? So I think both theories are completely plausible here. It's possible that at the beginning it was only the protagonist, was only Baby Doll that was imagining that all her friends were just joining her on all those great, you know, video game-like adventures. And it's possible that afterward they joined her in on this, or it's also possible that it was happening since the beginning for them. You know, all these girls, they're also, I think, scarred enough to start dreaming up something different, to start dreaming up a different sort of reality to make themselves feel better. So both are just completely plausible. Yeah, overall, that's pretty much it. I hope this actually helped a few people understand what the movie was about, because I know it can get a little bit confusing with all those layers of reality. So I hope it helped to shed some light.